way back in November of 1990, right as the Cold War was seemingly coming to an end, a speaker gave a lecture with a pretty wild take on world events. They saw everything not as politics, but as spiritual signs. So today, we're going to dive deep into that worldview, which connects the fates of world leaders with the personal suffering of individual souls. So that was the prediction made that day. Talk about dramatic, right? The speaker wasn't seeing a new era of global cooperation. Nope. They saw the world standing on the edge of a massive spiritual crisis. And that really set the tone for a message of, well, incredible urgency. So what exactly was this speaker seeing that maybe others weren't? Well, they believed that the biggest political headlines of the day were actually signs, direct indicators that a kind of spiritual winter was on its way, a time of global chaos. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. The lecture was given the day after Margaret Thatcher announced her resignation. Now, to the speaker, this wasn't just a political shift. It was the departure of what they called an angel of light, a spiritual guide whose job was done. And then they predicted the exact same thing would happen to Mikhail Gorbachev, another angel, saying his inevitable downfall would plunge the entire world into a dark valley. And this really gets to the heart of why they admired Thatcher so much. For them, she was the perfect example of a true leader, someone who doesn't just follow the polls, but has the guts to steer the ship against the current, no matter how unpopular it is. Her leaving the world stage was seen as a huge loss of that kind of essential courage. So here's where things take a big turn. We've been talking about geopolitics, right? World leaders, global trends. But now, the focus shifts from that massive stage to something way more personal, way more intimate. The lingering pain of the past and the condition of souls who have passed on. The speaker went on to diagnose what they saw as a deep spiritual sickness, arguing that the unresolved traumas of our history were actively poisoning the present. And to make this point, they used a really powerful example from Japan's own history. Think about this number. Over 200,000 people lost their lives in the Battle of Okinawa. Now, this happened 45 years before the lecture, but for the speaker, this wasn't just some historical fact. It was a raw, open, spiritual wound that had never healed. And here's the core of the issue, according to this worldview. The speaker claimed that tens of thousands of these souls were, well, they were still there. They hadn't moved on. They were believed to be stuck, just reliving the horror and confusion of their final moments over and over again in the spirit world. And this right here, this is the reason for all that suffering. It's the profound lack of resolution, that big, burning question, why? That's what supposedly keeps them anchored to this state of pain. They aren't just trapped by death itself, but by the complete lack of meaning in their death. Okay, so if these spirits are trapped because of their mindset, then what decides anyone's fate? What's the difference maker? Well, the speaker laid out a surprisingly simple but incredibly profound choice, a fork in the road that applies to every single one of us, whether we're living or not. All right, now this is the absolute core of the whole argument. It all comes down to two mindsets. The heavenly mindset, that's all about self-reflection. When things go wrong, you look in the mirror. When things go right, you look around and say thank you. But the hellish mindset, it's the complete opposite. Every failure is someone else's fault. The government, your parents, society. And every success, oh, that's all you, baby. So the main takeaway here is huge. It's not the external events that shape your spiritual reality. It's your internal reaction to them. This one single choice, do you take responsibility or do you cast blame, is basically the engine that drives your eternal destiny. So if the big problem is having a hellish mindset, then what's the fix? The speaker didn't just point out the problem. They offered a very specific, step-by-step plan for salvation for both the living and the dead. The solution is called a correct memorial service. And the central idea is actually pretty intuitive. You can't save someone who's drowning if you don't know how to swim yourself. It means you can't help a lost spirit if you yourself are spiritually lost. So enlightenment for the living has to come first. And this is broken down into a clear 4-step process. First, you have to study the teachings to enlighten yourself. Step 2, while you're studying, you hold a clear intention to help a specific loved one who has passed. Then comes the tool. The books themselves are described as conduits, beacons that actually appear as masses of golden light to spirits. And finally, you create a connection by placing those books near an altar or a photo, allowing the truth you're learning to flow to the soul in need. Now, for the really severe cases of spiritual disturbance, the lecture laid out something much more intense, a ritual that's basically a kind of exorcism. It involves creating a protective spiritual barrier, a kikai, by arranging about 100 of the group's books in a circle. The person sits inside the circle while recordings of lectures play and special prayers are chanted. It's meant to create this powerful field of positive energy to drive out any negative influences. So after laying out all these very specific techniques, the speaker zoomed back out to this beautiful universal principle. And the idea is that happiness isn't something you're meant to hoard for yourself. It's like fresh fruit. If you keep it all to yourself, it's just going to spoil. When you receive happiness, it comes with a responsibility to share it. And this brings us to the final takeaway, which is just brilliant. It's a 3-part philosophy for what to do with happiness. First, you have to humbly accept and appreciate it. That's sekufuku. Second, you have to actively share that good fortune with others. That's bunpuku. And finally, you have to plant the seeds for future happiness by investing in others. That's shokofuku. It's a complete life cycle of joy. In the end, this whole prophecy from 1990 leaves us with a question that's just as powerful today as it was then. When you really look at it, whether you're talking about global events or just your own life, how much of everything is shaped not by what happens to us, but by that simple internal choice? Do we take ownership or do we point the finger?